Good evening, folks. It's nice to see everyone. My name is Alex Nguyen. I am the current city manager, and we are here to discuss your CFD. So thanks for being here. This is also being streamed over Zoom. So for those who are watching on Zoom, hello, good evening. This is going to be about a 5-hour meeting, so brace yourselves, those of you at home. Okay, so let me make a few introductory remarks, and then I'm going to hand it over to our staff who will go over the budget for this neighborhood, and then we'll have an open discussion. So first and foremost, I just want to get a show of hands. How many people actually know what a Melabruce community is? Great. And how many people actually saw the information when you bought your property here, actually read the actual paragraph? That's almost everyone. So we do have a handout about a Melabruce and the actual section from the real estate disclosure. So I'll make that available as well. So wait, everyone says they know what Melabruce is, right? Okay, so that's good. I don't need to get into that. And almost all of you raise your hand acknowledging that you read the disclosure forms on real estate documents. All right, so that's actually really good. Okay, so with that, I'm going to bring up, I'm sorry, to introduce your council member. Our council member, Gabe Tron, is here. Where is he? There he is. We also have our Public Works Director, Michael Wolf, sitting here. And then we have other staff here, which you'll meet as we have the Q&A and the discussion. So with that, I'm going to invite Eric Story to come make some comments.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Story. I'm your Special Districts Manager. And this is the third budget meeting that we've had. So I just want to quickly recap kind of some of the discussions and items that we've done so far. So on April 4th, we met via Zoom with various members of the Riverpark Neighborhood Council, as well as residents within the community. The list is there. One important feature of our role as special districts is rebuilding the relationships and educating and informing the community on the housing lives. So I think what's really important is the quote that we received from one of the participants. It's on there. So then April 21st, after discussing some of the budget, we got some updated numbers. We figured out some new things that we didn't know because Anthony and I are both new within 9 months, 10 months here, give or take. So we brought back some new information, some new numbers, new processes. Wanted to share that at the 21st. We had it here at the middle school, but in the normal meeting spot, the cafeteria. I want to thank the Riverpark Neighborhood Council for sending out those invites. And again, we had various members of the community, Riverpark Neighborhood Council, as well as OPD in attendance. So I just want to say thank you all for participating then, as well as now. Tonight's presentation will be handled mostly by Mr. Anthony Miller, who is your project manager for Riverpark. He knows the ins and outs, and he will be able to address any questions that we have as we progress through this tonight.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. And for those of you who haven't met me via Zoom before, my name is Anthony Miller. I'm the project manager for the Riverpark neighborhood, the Wagon Wheel CFD, and soon to be Sackville Farm CFD. However, I spend the majority of my time here in Riverpark. I recognize most of you from the neighborhood council meetings. Also, I see a couple faces out there I see from emails. I'll start this off by saying, if you ever have any questions regarding your CFD or what's going on in the neighborhood, feel free, grab a card on your way in and out. My name is Anthony Miller, like I said, and email me, call me. I'm available for you guys. So we're going to discuss the budget tonight. So fiscal year 21-22. Basically, we're going to do some pretty basic breakdowns and how going forward into 22-23, how things are going to change or stay the same depending upon what's been budgeted year over year. So a little bit of an overview with CFD. You have all probably seen this if you're familiar with the formation documents for the CFD. There are authorized improvements that are part of the CFD from its formation, which include this list right here. And all of your CFD property tax dollars, your assessment, they go to the funding and the establishment and maintenance of these services. So last year, for fiscal year 21-22, there was a $2.9 million total levy. That is the amount of money that was received in revenue for the CFD 5. A $732,000 levy credit, which, to put this in simple terms, essentially the budget was approximately $3.6 million, $2.9 million was levied from the district, so $732,000 was removed from the fund balance to pay to lower the overall total levy that came from the neighborhood. The current fund balance, which is an important thing that we'll go over in a few slides, is $3.1 million, which means that there is approximately $3.1 million in the reserve fund balance for CFD 5. This is an accumulation of revenues year over year. Your money, if it's not spent at the very end of the year through that year's fiscal year's budget, it gets put into the fund balance, so it doesn't disappear. Anything over 100% funded on fund balance is considered fully funded, or anything over 130% is considered surplus. And currently the fund balance is approximately 95.5%. And I'll get into a little bit more detail with that and we get start discussing some projects. But essentially 95% funded essentially means that if there were to be any unexpected or large capital projects, the fund balance would be able to cover those items without increasing the annual levy to fund that particular project. So to cover some of fiscal year 21-22, what was done within your CFD, we've hired a grounds worker, a financial analyst, a project manager, hello everyone, and a special districts manager. So the entire special districts team is extremely new to this office. There was a lot of turnover in this particular office. So I was actually the first project manager back in the office after all the rest of the project managers went off to whatever role they decided to go off to. So we've pruned over 950 trees this year. We're replacing over 100 trees. We're currently in progress, about to replace another 50 more. We've recovered 300 landscape plantings and over 25 pounds of grass seed as part of our normal landscape contract at no additional cost. And we actually just completed, I'm very happy to say we just completed this last Tuesday, the resurfacing at East Park and Vineyards Park playgrounds. So those are brand new, they are open. So please tell your kids to go jump and play on them. They're perfectly brand new and ready to go get played on. We're also in the process of repainting and repairing park restroom doors, and we just recently eliminated about 166 trip hazards along Forest Park Boulevard exclusively. So to get a little bit more in detail with the budget, so that way you all can actually read the budget, because it can be a little esoteric, I understand. Basically, it's broken down into certain elements: a fund number, division number, an activity, an element, and an object. We like to focus on the element and the objects because more often than not, if you're talking special districts budget, this all stays the same. So we did pause in our previous meetings for questions at this point. I can keep on moving if we'd like, unless somebody has a question. Yes.
Of those 4 people that were listed on the second screen, are we paying 100% of their salaries?
So I'll repeat for the individuals on Zoom. The question was, is the Riverpark CFD you're paying 100% of the staff salaries from the previous slide? And the answer is no. Actually, the CFD is not paying 100% of any of those position salaries. They're split between the other CFDs in the city and also the LMDs. For example, I'm actually one of the only staff members that's directly funded from the CFD, and I am funded at 90%. So I spend 90% of my time here, which is very much, I would say it's actually probably I spend like 92% of my time here, simply because of the size compared to the other two that pay into this that particular staff pool. Yes, in the back.
So were the trees replaced because they were diseased, or were they?
So for those on Zoom, the question was, are trees replaced because they're diseased? In some cases, I'm assuming they might have been diseased at one point in time, but those were only missing trees. So those were trees in which they had already been removed, and there was no planting there at the moment. I'll keep on going because we've got a few slides to get through. All right, so 8209 is our major bucket within this budget. 8209 is what we describe as our operations and maintenance or contract labor bucket. This is our primary expense here for this item. Landscape maintenance within the district is far and away the most expensive contract that the city manages within this district. Other items that are covered by this are all of our on-call O&M, such as electrical, irrigation, fence repair, things along those lines. Custodial servicing, stormwater filters, fire system maintenance. You can obviously read all of these. These are all things that are covered by this 8209 account. This all together, plus these two items here on the next slide, come out to a requesting $1.654 million budget, or a line item for this particular upcoming fiscal year. And you'll see year over year, or last year's fiscal year 21-22 budget was $1.6 million. We're essentially requesting a flat account line item from year over year for this particular account. 8229 is what's considered the special projects budget. Special projects account. 8229 is essentially for items that are considered special projects. They either don't exist currently within the district, what residents have requested they be added, or it's an unexpected expense. For example, tree replanting. Currently, as time has gone on, the Riverpark CFD over the last 17 years or so has seen about 450 trees die or be removed. So as this has been a long ongoing issue, it was seemed appropriate to place this particular project in the special projects budget to fund it separately from what we consider normal operations and maintenance expenses. The gazebo has been brought to my attention on multiple occasions by multiple individuals, and we wanted to make sure that it was lined out in this budget for this fiscal year. In fact, I most recently received an estimate that placed the expected cost right about this number. So that asterisk there means something else. I'll explain it here in another slide, but we may not have to use funding from this other bucket that I'm about to talk about. In the previous meetings, there was a discussion regarding ADA entrances and the multi-use trail. It was determined through discussion that this is not a particularly necessary item to be funded by the district. The current situation with the multi-use trail is that the gates are left open, except for currently we have a washout. So there is one section that is closed. And with those gates would be left open 24/7. Currently, we haven't seen any particular uptick or complaints regarding individuals in and off of the trail overnight. They were originally meant to be closed in the evenings, but like I said, as they have been left open, they were causing more problems being closed. Some of them wouldn't close, some of them would. And there was an inconsistent issue there. So with the gates left open 24/7, there is a need for an ADA entrance because it's a path of travel issue. People can come in and out as freely without any kind of restriction. So it eliminated the need to install new entrances with the gate open. The North Detention Basin landscaping, if you're familiar with the district, the trail, the North Detention Basin is behind Xanadu. It is the section of the trail that goes over by the Santa Clara River Basin. That area has, at one point in time, I've gotten conflicting answers. At one point in time, may have been planned for landscaping, may not have been planned for landscaping. What has happened though is that the developer never installed landscaping in that particular area. The $20,000 here was estimated to be enough funding to install irrigation and begin to have a discussion regarding landscape plantings in that area, drought-tolerant landscape plantings. However, with our new water restrictions, we may want to further discuss whether or not this is a potentially necessary expense for the district. All new plantings would obviously be drought-tolerant. However, an additional irrigation expense and additional utility expense may not be the most prudent idea at this time. The dog park was apparently supposed to be a phased project. This is something that was brought to my attention by a resident. It is not something that I was here for when it was originally planned. So the last phase basically included shade structures over the picnic tables, the entrance to the dog park. This was discussed at the previous meeting, and through the discussion was determined that in order to lower the overall budget request, it was not necessary to include this one in this fiscal year's budget. So that was removed. 8229 continues. We do have some storage boxes in the area. Those were not planned expenses for this year. However, they are in serious need of repair and replacement in order to maintain the integrity of not only the city's equipment, but also the equipment that your tax dollars have funded and the security of it. So we do have some storage boxes that will need to be replaced this year. And basketball hoops and backboards is on the list for this year as well because of deterioration. It was also not a planned expense for this year, but due to the wear and tear, it's something that we see is necessary. So the overall requested budget for this year is actually for this line item is $100,000, which is down $50,000 from the previous year. The expense from 2 years ago, actual expense was $144,000. And so as you can see, this has actually gone down year over year. This is the 8229 bucket still. This is something that we call fund balance funded projects, or as we affectionately call in the office, FIBIT. These items here are items that are identified in your reserve study that is published every year. It essentially accounts for all of the assets within your district and their expected lifespan. When a lifespan reaches 0 on a particular asset, it's considered to be due for replacement or maintenance of some kind. All of the following items are identified as at 0 expected life. However, they're not included in this budget, but these are identified objects that we thought might be a better idea to bring to the community during the year, because they would typically be using fund balance, which is what I referred to earlier on the earlier slides regarding the $3.1 million fund balance. That money would be used to fund projects like this, because that money has been kept year over year to fund the expense of the maintenance and replacement costs of things like this. So that way you don't fund them all at once. Essentially, this is a pretty comprehensive list from this slide to the next slide. The idea is to give the community a roundabout idea as to how much it might cost. We wouldn't necessarily replace all 100 pieces of park furniture because there's plenty of park furniture out there that doesn't need to be replaced. But there is some park furniture out there that might need to be replaced. Rather than put that in your typical O&M budget, the suggestion was to use the fund balance to fund these projects. So that way it wasn't coming out of this year's levy. However, like I said, this is not being included in this year's budget. So after discussions with the community later on in the year, we would end up taking this back to City Council to do a mid-year adjustment or some kind of during the fiscal year adjustment to make sure that we can authorize the expenditures. However, we did think it was important that these are presented as items that are possible for this upcoming year budget. So the total amount here, if we were to do every single thing up to what the expected cost would be, which by the way, these estimates are likely a little low because they were developed last year. And unfortunately, everything's gone up by 30%. So unfortunately, some of these items are likely much more expensive than they are listed here, but that was also part of the discussion we would have with the community is, okay, if we're not going to be doing this, perhaps this can be a little bit more expensive than what was planned for, or perhaps we can replace a little bit more ahead of schedule to get ahead of things. But this is all up for discussion. Like I said, also, this is not currently included in this year's budget. So it is not a budget line item at the moment. Capital improvement projects are a big part of any maintenance program within a city. And typically these involve your higher dollar amount items over 6 figures or over $100,000. Existing, so we do currently have 43 irrigation controllers within the district that are in need of replacement. They are of various ages. The oldest ones go back about 15 years. The newest ones are about 9 years old. So they're all a little long in the tooth. It was estimated on an older estimate that about $182,000 be put aside for this. It's likely going to cost a little bit more. However, we're in the scoping phase of this project. And this is money that has already been put aside for this project. The fountain repair has been identified as a project. It is unfortunately suffering from some scoping issues from a previous project manager. The original scope for this project was to do a like-for-like replacement of this fountain. However, there's some serious design problems within this fountain that would really necessitate some major changes to the structure. There was $650,000 budgeted for this project. However, as I said, it's currently in progress. We're currently rescoping, and I do not have a firm cost estimate at the moment. The aim is obviously to come in lower than this, and that's the aim of every capital project, is to come in under budget. New projects for this year are irrigation pumps, and that is the only CIP that is planned for this upcoming fiscal year. And I should say also in progress was the playground resurfacing. That is considered a capital project. And I'm very happy to also say not only were we done early on it, We were scheduled to be done in 2 weeks. We're actually said we were done 2 days ago. We also came in about $100,000 under budget, so I was pretty happy, pretty pleased with that. The irrigation pumps we expect are likely to cost in the range of $300,000. That has been included in this year's CIP plan. That $300,000 would be funded from the fund balance. It is not something that is considered a levy item. So here's our personnel breakdown. So a little bit more to what you were speaking about, sir, was the how are your staff funded. So a percent of each of these 3 individuals, so myself, our grounds worker, and our landscape inspector, is funded between Riverpark, Wagon Wheel, and Sapio Farms. The majority of those personnel expenses do come from Wagon or Riverpark because they spend most of their time in Riverpark. And a percent of each of these positions here are covered through the Special District Admin Fund 172, which is covered from a portion of the contribution that Riverpark puts in. So essentially, Riverpark pays a portion of this budget, and it goes into Fund 172 for administrative expenses such as personnel. Yes.
Wagon wheel is built out. It's not anywhere near close to being built out, as far as I know. Will that change the percentage of time personnel is here in Riverpark?
So the question for those of you online was, when Wagon Wheel is finished being built out, will that change the overall percentage of time or the percentage funded through Wagon Wheel and potentially reduce, I'm assuming, what's funded through Riverpark? It's a possibility. I can't tell you for sure because I can't predict how much time will be necessary in those areas. But I would say that some change is going to be likely. I couldn't give you a range or percentage as to what that is. Currently, right now, the breakdown is 95 and 5. So 90% Riverpark, 5% Wagon Wheel, 5% Sapio Farms. So once again, these items here are shared between special districts of Fund 172. It's a wide split. I will tell you that Riverpark does not contribute a majority to any of these positions. It's shared between all the districts and LMDs. The total fiscal year 22-23 personnel expenses is requested at $546,865. And you'll see actuals and budgeted here. It's not too much of a difference year over year. We did add staff that was not in last year's budget. So that's part of the reason why this request is a little higher. But also between 20 and 21 and 21 and 22, there was a lot of turnover in special district's office. So your actual expenses are going to be much lower than what your budgeted expenses are in this particular category. So that was it for the personnel section. And I think I should have maintenance and operations or O&M, operations maintenance. Are there any questions so far? Besides what was already answered. Okay. Making good time. So indirect expenses is another section of our budget, and I will say that this section here, 8532, excludes Oxnard Police Department. Oxnard Police Department is part of the budget; they're just not funded through this account. So this section here, indirect expenses, this is city overhead associated with supporting the special district's office. There's a lot of staff in the city that we work with that don't work for us. So this is our way of funding some of the administrative efforts that the rest of city departments and divisions do for special districts on behalf of special districts. We do not have a lot of control over this expense. It really depends on how much administrative work is required. And so year over year, this can fluctuate. We're expecting it to go up very slightly compared to the actual expenses from the previous year and actually down from our budgeted amount last year. Utilities is another section here that the CFD pays for directly. We are not expecting any increases in utility costs year over year here. And police services, I will summarize this. We do have 2 representatives from the police department here who may be able to answer more specific questions. But the way that the police department is budgeted for the supplemental service that is provided out here is through the quote unquote overtime account. That is basically a generic bucket account that then gets split out to benefits and time and things like that. So the overall total personnel cost is expected to be approximately $175,000. The rentals originally was $50,000. However, due to a new agreement with the storefront in Riverpark, that has actually been reduced to nothing. And office equipment, includes some supplies that the police department is requesting to enhance their enforcement efforts in this area. Indirect costs are the same exact thing that we just discussed regarding services, administrative services provided by the rest of the city. And utilities, IT, and contract services amount to about just under $12,000. So the total OPD expense is expected to be $211,848, which, as you can see, is actually lower than previous years. And part of that is due to some research that was put into essentially right-sizing the personnel expense line item. Over the last 3 years, the actual expenses all fell under $175,000. So that's what the budget was set for this year, to lower the overall expected levy to come from Riverpark. Now we can get into some miscellaneous budget expenses, and I do say miscellaneous, but they're no less important. They are a variety of dollar amounts, but they don't really fit easily into one category or another. And a lot of times they are split into their own accounts. So that's why they're all put together here on one slide. I can break out any that anybody has any questions on. However, they're all pretty self-explanatory. And one that I will say right here is actually subscriptions and publications. That's essentially for publishing capital project information for bidding and things along those lines. Yes, in the back.
What's the county collection charge?
So for those on the internet, county collection charges, that is essentially what it costs the county to collect your taxes. That's the administrative cost.
We just go through that, I'm sorry.
Sure, no. I mean, absolutely.
Rather than like specifically ask.
So your bank charges here is something that is typically, it's essentially a bank finance charge. The general fund is covering this line item expense this year for all divisions and departments, I believe. And that was $7,000 previous year. It's been reduced to zero. County collection charges, like I just mentioned, that's the administrative cost of the county. Equipment maintenance, that is the equipment that your staff use out in Riverpark on a yearly basis. That is everything from oil changes to, I would say getting the mower blade sharpened on a particular piece of equipment we use for specific areas. That is $36,205 or expected to be. Supplies custodial are your restroom supplies, soap, toilet paper, paper towels. Shop and field supplies are everything from plant material that your grounds worker plants and then hands over to the landscape inspector or landscape contractor, to your nuts, bolts, hardware, playground supplies, all sorts. Safety is safety vests, cones, things along those lines. Like subscriptions and publications are for publicizing bidding information for capital improvement projects that take place in here. In this district. And training and professional development includes things like the playground safety inspector training that our landscape inspector will be taking this year. And maintenance management school is another one for our grounds worker. They are your frontline maintenance workers. So that will be primarily expended on training and or training for those particular positions that are specifically related to their job duties here in the district. Rentals, vehicles, and equipment, this pays for the overall cost of the vehicle lease cost that is for the grounds worker and the landscape inspector. That's for the vehicles that you see driving through the district. And data processing is our IT cost for the office, incurred by the three employees, myself, and the portion goes to, I believe, the admin budget as well. And then liability insurance is something that is necessary in case one of our employees unfortunately does something or is hit by something. And of course, telephone is our last item there, and that includes cell phones, desk phones, things along those lines. So yes, Councilman Duran.
Anthony, we have a question on Zoom. They're asking, will Riverpark residents have input in the fountain project?
So that's a great question. And for those who didn't hear it, it's Riverpark residents have input on the fountain project. That is my personal goal. So as a project manager, I am the person who manages these projects. So the idea with scoping out the fountain, essentially, when I came in the door, was to basically, I was given the project kind of, in a pile, here, figure this out. And I noticed that what had been done previously was essentially, like I said, it was a like for like replacement to do exactly what was there before. And that's not typically how I like to do any kind of project, especially one that's using public funds and it's a public feature. And it's a really high dollar project. So absolutely, my ideal outcome here would be to potentially scope this out to give an outline or a bare bones idea as to what can be done in the area, and then open it up for wider discussion to make it a more community involved project, to see what ideas the community has and what they'd like to see there, because at the end of the day, it is your fountain. Yes, sir.
Actually, so when we're maintaining vehicles or equipment, whose equipment are we maintaining? Does the city own that equipment, or like the telephones? Riverpark have its own telephone system? I call Riverpark, somebody answer and say, "Hi, this is Riverpark."
You do, in a way. So it's part of, yeah.
So I get that. So I get that. We don't have liability coverage, do we?
The liability coverage there is specific to the employees that work in this district.
Okay, and then the maintenance, and that, the vehicle maintenance, and that type of thing, we don't have our own vehicles, those are city vehicles being maintained, right?
Those are, so they all, everything here is a piece of city equipment, correct? However, it is exclusively used in the service of this district. So those,
And then what's the overhead cover? You had a few screens back where there was a few $100,000 for overhead.
so were you referring to indirect here?
Yeah, which was about 10% of the budget, right? The overhead.
So
The
this,
city charges us 10%, about 10% of our budget for overhead expenses.
so this
What's that
particular,
versus what you're showing me on the other screen. And what is that total up to about?
so if we combine that particular line item for vehicle maintenance, which was about $36,000, this would total with the budgeted, expected budgeted expense would be about $375,000. So to,
75 plus the 339. Sounds like,
it would be, I was saying $36,000 for vehicle maintenance and equipment maintenance, things along those lines. I was just using that as an example. So this here is purely administrative. So it doesn't actually cover any particular hard costs for, like I said, for the vehicle. That's going to be a fleet exclusive cost in which they perform certain maintenance or services that are specifically tied to a piece of equipment.
I don't know. I mean, those vehicles are used citywide.
They're not citywide, no, they're not.
The telephone system, we don't have our own telephone system.
Those, so the telephone charges I referred to there, that's literally the cell phone bill for the 3 employees that work in this district. So I really do want to hammer this point home. These vehicles and equipment and this equipment maintenance, these pieces of equipment do not leave this district. The only time that, for example, a vehicle leaves this district is to go back to the corporate yard on Pacific to be parked overnight. Yes.
Will those vehicles and equipment be used for the other CFDs, CFD 7?
So for CFD 7 for wagon wheel, they'll be used to a potentially small extent. So for example, if I use the 5% figure as an example for staff time, that's 2 hours a week. So these equipment costs are split between the districts proportionally based upon their time. So those budgets will also include a small portion for vehicle and equipment maintenance as well. Now, the equipment maintenance here on the top, I will say, that's slightly separate than your vehicles, because a lot of that is vehicle maintenance, absolutely, but some of that, it does include equipment that is exclusively used here. We try and separate that as best as we can to make sure that equipment that is dedicated to CFD 5 never leaves the district. If it's something that is exclusively meant to be used here, for example, we have a root pruner that we would pretty much only use here because we don't have the type of landscape that we do in Wagon Wheel as we do in Riverpark. That piece of equipment's maintenance would more than likely in the future only be budgeted from Riverpark. And I say in the future because that was just a hypothetical example that I pulled out. Obviously, I just want to use that as an example to illustrate that this is exclusively for equipment that is used and maintained here. Okay, so the total amount for all of the miscellaneous budget, we total this all up, is a requested 192,121. Now you will see a bump here from the previous year, partially because there is a new vehicle that's being added to the fleet for that particular grounds worker that we just discussed. So that will include a lease payment that wasn't there previously before. However, on the other end, I do expect that we might actually see a maintenance cost start to drop there because the lease includes things like certain items of regular maintenance that would normally get billed out of your operations and maintenance budget. I don't know what that cost is going to be yet, so we're unable to really accurately budget for that. So this is likely going to be a little bit high. So your overall budget request for this year, and you total all these things, these items up, except for your capital improvement projects and your fund balance projects that were on that slide there a few slides back. Those are not included in your budget for this year because those are funded through either fund balance. Well, the capital improvement projects funded through your fund balance, and potential projects will be funded through your fund balance. The total amount is $3,672,000. Sorry, $3,672,765. There is also being proposed a $600,000 levy credit in order to keep the overall special tax amount as close to flat from the previous year as possible. The overall maximum special tax for this year would be $6,131,394. That we're proposing is about 50% of the maximum special tax value. So year over year, your special tax would likely stay percentage-wise will stay proportionally flat. And the expected outcomes we see from this budget is we do absolutely want to make this a point of emphasis this year and for following years. We want to improve the responsiveness that we have to this community, and to the point regarding the capital projects, the fountain, that's part of that. We want this to be an open discussion, and we want to say, is even though I wasn't here, we've learned from past mistakes, particularly with previous contractors, and that's a big part of it. We're consistently on those contractors and maintaining those contracts to make sure that the level of service that you're receiving is appropriate for what you're paying for it. And deferred maintenance projects that are identified, particularly as a part of the reserve studies, we want to make sure that those are identified and completed in a manner in which the community likes to see them done. So those are some major points for us going forward for this upcoming fiscal year and into the future. And with that, I'll turn it over for questions that I can answer, and then potentially the city manager will stand up as well and answer questions too. Yes.
So with the contract with Garcia that maintains and funds coming out of these various pots of money to cover the Garcia's contract, is there typically landscaping? Are they being paid a prevailing wage and benefits?
So
If you're paying top dollar for that, is that top dollar paid certainly now to the guys that are out here, doing the job?
that's a great question. So so for those online, the question is, are our landscape contractors, or are all contractors, yes, extend that, assuming, are all contractors that are on call or currently contracted for the CFD services, are they paid prevailing wage? And the answer to that question is yes, with one exception, and that is the U.S. Metro restroom services contract. That contract is actually being paid a living wage. But the beginning of almost, I believe, every single city contract that the city enters into is a requirement that those contractors be paid prevailing wage. I have a fan. I know. Yes.
Why aren't the reserves a separate account? I saw the reserve setting, dollar amount per year. Why is that? It seems like you mix it in with the budget, but it changes every year. If you keep adding, you should be adding to it for repairs in the future.
So I'll repeat your question. So the question is, why aren't reserve funds or the reserve account a separate account? Does that summarize it pretty well? Or it seems as though they're mixing. So the reserve fund isn't kept in a separate account. You're correct. It is a reserve fund balance. It is essentially a rolling balance. Now, in order for a reserve fund to be kept in a separate account, there would have to be a separate account set up, and I won't get into the specific administrative processes behind that. And I'm sure there are probably some legal questions regarding that as well, because CFD funds are not to be mixed, obviously. But that primarily has to do with mixing between certain areas of responsibility. For the reserve funds, those ideally would change every year, but they don't always go up. It really depends on a number of factors. It depends on whether or not your current projects are using reserve funds, which means over time, your rolling balance has collected enough money to fund certain projects that are now at the end of their useful life. So in that particular case, your reserve fund might actually go down. And additionally, reserve funds are often seen, this is not just specific to Oxnard special districts, this is something that happens statewide. A reserve fund, when it sees that it's in a surplus position or in a over 100% position potentially, or there's been a discussion to set a levy at a certain percentage point, like for example, in this case, it's at about approximately 50%. At times, a levy credit might be issued in order to control the overall levy on a fiscal year. Those funds are essentially operating expenses that are being funded from the reserve in that fiscal year. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but there is no, I would say there is no inappropriate mixing of funds. The reserve fund is something that is essentially able to be appropriated from the budget time or by city council as the needs for the district arise.
Do you do a reserve fund study every year?
Yes. And it is a legal requirement that there is a site visit reserve study done every 3 years. So this previous year was the last no site visit update. Next year will be a site visit in which the firm that the city uses will come out and we're talking, they literally count the inches on the parks to make sure that they get an accurate understanding of how much this cost will be.
Really stupid question.
There's no such thing.
It's stupid. My husband bought here before I came, so I've never seen the original agreement, right? So what he agreed to is fine. Is money being allocated or spent outside of the original sale agreement?
So the question was, is money being allocated or spent outside of the original agreement for the Belarus? And the answer to that question, I can tell you for this budget is absolutely not. And for previous budgets, I was not here for, so I can't speak to. But the formation documents explain categorically what those funds can be spent on. And this budget contains items that are exclusively a part of those outlined items. Yes.
Thank you for all the detail. I'm trying to tie the first slide to the last slide. If you apply the levy credit this year, does that leave us at the 95% funded, or is the 95% funded where we're currently at?
The 95% funded is where we're currently at. And sorry, that's question was that the levy credit is applied. Was that for 95? Is it 95% for this year or next fiscal year? And it's for this fiscal year. The current fund balance is 95.5% funded.
Do we know if we apply the levy credit where that would leave us in the percent funded?
So I can't make a very good educated guess. If everything were to be spent at absolutely 100% and the entire budget is spent perfectly down to the dime, you could easily subtract $600,000 from the fund balance and that would be your answer. But at the end of the year, there's oftentimes funds that aren't spent for, supply issues. We weren't able to get something in time, so we never ordered it. The contractor wasn't able to perform a job, so that job never got completed, or something cost less than what we expected. Those funds don't go away, they get rolled into the fund balance. So there's a net there of whatever the levy credit was plus what wasn't spent at the end of the year. Yeah, I love this stuff, so keep me going, guys. Yes, yeah.
Question is, do you have these inspector general audits or an independent audit on these expenses? Do you have that? How often are they do that?
So the question is essentially, are these expenses audited? So the city, correct me if I'm wrong, is audited every year. And as this is one of the city's budgets and some of the city's expenses, they're included in that audit with the rest of the city's expenses.
Is it done by an independent source?
Yes.
Oh.
That's an overhead expense, that's not a line item expense.
That would be, actually, that's actually a great point. That would be considered something that would come out of the indirect charges out of the district funds. Yes.
I had two questions, and one would be for the sports field facilities that are here at the school that we use. Are those what were listed in the miscellaneous expenses for supplies and sport field, or is that a different line item?
So let me go back to the slide real quick, just to make sure I know exactly what you're referring to. So miscellaneous, are we referring to shop and field here?
Yes, shop.
Okay, so the question was, are sports field expenses for the fields behind Rio Vista and Rio Del Mar, are those expenses categorized in shop and field? And the answer to that question is yes and no. There are supplies that are used out there. They would come out of this bucket, but those are not exclusively for the sports fields. No.
And then the other question I had was, are there revenues, since my understanding, if I get it wrong, if the residents are paying for the expenses associated with the sports fields, are there incoming revenues from the other users since the residents don't have access to it? So leagues in the school.
Bear with me. The question is, are revenues from the sports fields, are those accounted for within the CFD's expense or accounts, correct?
Yeah, what basically are the other users contributing revenues that go into the sports fields?
So the answer to that question is kind of a multifaceted one. There is a revenue account that is used that accounts for, excuse me, oops, and I went back too far. All right, there is a revenue account that is associated with rentals, and that includes things like your park pavilion expenses. And this is something that I wasn't super familiar with when I came on board, so I had to do a lot of digging actually before I found the answer to that question. And yes, there is actually a revenue account. You see some revenues from like your barbecue shelters and things like that. I'm not going to say you're going to blow the bank out of the water. It's not a lot. And some groups do pay for the use of those fields, particularly soccer groups. So during the soccer season, there is rental revenue that comes from those fields. There are two groups, however, that do use those fields that were included in a joint use agreement when the city planned this community out with the middle school district, and that is your Little League and your softball groups. Those groups currently have access to the fields at no cost.
So the revenue that comes in from the soccer team, does that go to the city or does that go to our fund?
The revenues from that, from the soccer leagues, that does go into the CFD's funds.
Okay, when did that get implemented? Because I have two project managers prior to you that said, no, we did not get the funds back to our CFD. That would be Joseph Beardshare and what's the last lady that
Jerry Cooper.
Huh?
Jerry Cooper.
Those
So-
both confirmed that no, we did not get. They go like a levy credit or something that said you kept the funds.
So to repeat the question is, it was said previously to myself that revenues were not actually given back to the CFD for these rentals. From my understanding, that was wrong. That's my understanding. I do not know if there has been any changes for sure, but from what I was told from other city staff that actually accounts for these items, that those accounts have always been there.
Okay, well, I want to back it up how I even came about to ask this question. Back when I came on as the neighborhood council chair, Clay Downey had suggested to do a potluck. And I found out that the city wanted money for us to reserve the park. Given that this was a community event, I didn't think I should. The city was not willing to waive it. So Joseph Beardshare and I had a discussion about it. He called me back a few days later. We worked out. He said, you know what, it's a public park. Just show up, and if anybody deserves it, I'll let you know. I feel badly because you guys pay to maintain this, but you don't get a credit. That's how I found out.
So
So that's why I'm asking if and when it changed.
I
I
can,
didn't make a big thing about it.
so just to summarize, there was a time in which neighborhood council event was supposed to be held in the park, and the city was apparently not willing at the time to waive the fee for the reservation. And from my understanding, you still held the event.
Oh, we still have it. Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't pay. That was it's
So-
a community event. It's not a private. It's something that I like working with people to do for the community.
So those are great questions, and it's a great example of what could potentially be a policy level issue. It's not something that I would feel comfortable talking about on Joseph's behalf, simply because I absolutely wasn't here at the time. I can tell you that the revenue account string that I have seen for rentals is a CFD account. It's Fund 174. So this was only an expense summary that you saw. This is an expense budget. It doesn't include the revenue side. But if we were to look at the revenue side finance sheets, they would include an account for rentals and rental revenues.
And this, if I can add. And if I can add to the question, on the revenue side, we do have a line item budgeted for roughly 13,000 in revenue this year. It's roughly halfway there. So we are collecting revenues on behalf of the facilities here, and they are being applied to the CFD. Yes.
Okay, so when you collect the revenue, and I know people have to make a deposit part, but I think we've all kind of encountered people leaving it in disarray. How much of that are you really collecting back? Going out, I know it's kind of hard to monitor. People show up that may not have a reservation.
And that is actually, to summarize again, the question is, how are we keeping track of our original deposits, for example, in case of a messy reservation or something like that? I can say that the special districts parks have recently been rolled into the Facilitron system, which Parks and Recreation, the Parks and Recreation divisions are using to keep track of reservations within the parks and the reservable facilities. It does come for the barbecue area number ones, the pavilion areas. Those areas do come with a $50 deposit. I have been on a number of occasions, actually prior to Facilitron being implemented, because parks reservations through Riverpark were being handled by the Parks Division and not my staff or myself. I would recommend at times a security deposit be retained, because what happens and how this is enforced on a practical level is our landscape contractor or city core staff will be out there over the weekend or on a Monday, and they'll say, this was left a disaster, I'm gonna have to spend extra time here, they'll take some photos and send it to me. But I can tell you that that has been a potential less than 5 times in the last 12 months. It's very rare that we actually get photographic evidence that it's been left in disarray to the point of where I would withhold a security deposit. Yes.
There was discussion several years ago about asking the school district to pay for half of the cost for the softball field. Yeah, I was at one of the meetings with the schools. They would have some people in there that weren't part of our park. The original agreement was for Riverpark children only, and it kind of got all mixed up. And so there was some discussion with the school district should pay half of sports. And the concession stand, is that in our budget also? We have to pay for it.
Is there a question? I'm sorry. Is there a question at the end?
The question is, are we trying to go to the school district and ask for them to pay a portion of it because they're using it?
So the question for those of you online is that for the sports fields and concession stands behind the schools, will the school district be asked to pay for a portion of those costs?
Yeah.
So currently under the current JUA, no, they are not being asked to pay for any costs. And I do not know if there are current discussions about amending that in any way, shape, or form. And that is about as far as I can go with that question.
I think
Would you care to join me?
sure.
Councilmember Duran.
Yes, so 2 things. First, do you want me to bring the PowerPoint back up so you can reference it, or you could?
I'm okay unless there's somebody who would like to reference a slide, or if there's a question from online.
Okay,
Would you like to
so
see the
there is a
slides?
question.
Okay, so I'll pull it. Hello, everyone. Actually, it looks like our mouse is missing.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me ask the questions first, and it's regarding the rental items, and I think you might have answered it, but I'll ask it. So what is the account number for the revenues collected for the events such as at the park? That's the first part of the question. Where can an owner or resident of Riverpark see those transactions? Then if rental revenue comes in, residents can see the money is going into CFD 5, not to the city.
So I can answer that question. Do you want me to repeat it? Or? So,
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So the question was what account string is rental revenue attributed to? Can residents see that account and can residents see the transaction activity? Does that about summarize it? So transaction level activity, that's probably something that would likely be tracked through Facilitron now. For previous transactions, that would have been through the Parks division. The account string, off the top of my head, I cannot confidently answer that question, but you can see it in the city's approved budget year over year. So those accounts should be present on the revenue side on the city's budget when approved in late June. And then there was a third part.
Rental revenue that comes in, residents can see that money goes to CFD 5 account, not to the city.
So since those rental revenues aren't specifically attributed to any particular expense, they're just part of the fund for Riverpark, which would be Fund 174. It would be a 174 account string. And then at the end of the fiscal year, there would be a certain dollar amount that would essentially add up to whatever was contributed to that line item throughout the year.
Okay, and the last part of this question. If revenue from park use events went to the city and not the CFD, does the city need to return those funds to the CFD?
And to repeat, with revenue, if it goes to the city, assuming the general fund, would it need to be returned to the CFD in some way, shape, or form? And I probably am not qualified to answer that question. So I would assume yes, but that is, like I said, it's something that I would have to leave to probably city attorney or city manager. Oh, the account string. 174-5702-581-7523. If anybody wants that entire string of numbers, we can easily email it to you.
What's the balance?
The current balance. This is not on the sheet.
We'll have to get the balance and put it online.
So we'll put it on.
Okay, I know the answer to the question. If the city collected funds and they did not give it to Riverpark, no, they are not obligated.
So, Di, like I said, I can't corroborate that in any way, shape, or form, so.
Based on what I saw. I understand you can't based on what you're about.
It's not allowed. I really don't know the question, answer the question, so.
But to be clear, we're talking about $13,000, right?
Yes, rental revenues for this last year, we budgeted $13,000. We've actually seen real revenues of about $7,500 at least. We're really knocking it out of the park there, guys. Yes.
One question that comes up or has come up fairly often the last year is regarding the enhanced police services. And I'm wondering if you or PD staff here would be willing to just kind of give an overview of that, how it's structured, how it works, so that folks here tonight and those watching on Zoom have a little bit of clarity about it and can ask any questions they have about it as well.
So I'll repeat the question, and that is essentially how do the enhanced police services practically work within the district, and what do those funds cover? So Officer Valenzuela, you are on the spot.
Okay, hello, everybody. My name's Corporal Valenzuela with the Oxnard Police Department. I am the district coordinator for Beat 14, which is a geographical area that's divided in the police department, and Riverpark falls within Beat 14 for Oxnard Police Department. My office, if you guys don't know, is at the collection, and that's where I'm stationed. I usually work Tuesday through Friday, Monday through Thursday, but I'm usually there during the week. As part of my responsibility as your district coordinator for Beat 14, specifically Riverpark, I do provide, it's labeled as enhanced police services, and that allows me to have 2 officers every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, specifically only in the Riverpark neighborhood. I understand that the collection is part of the Riverpark neighborhood, but those officers do not respond to any calls related to the collection. So for shopliftings at Target, disturbances at Copper Blues or Yard House, the only time that those officers would actually go into the collection property are for obvious emergencies, backups, or anything that arises where an officer needs to be diverted to go over there. One thing specific for your neighborhood is having that officer or those 2 officers working in your neighborhood for the response times. At the end of the shifts, the officers do report back to me via a activity log. That's not required, but that's something that I ask them to do because I want to know what calls they're going to in Riverpark to allow me to see where the officers need to go as far as areas of concerns. So with that, I have that responsibility of directing the officers as far as the problem locations. I do receive lots of calls from residences as far as their concerns, whether it be graffiti, the subjects disturbing in the parks. We do get a little overflow of crime that comes from the collection. I mean, you got thousands of people visiting that shopping center every day, even more on the weekends. And, some of that does flow out into the neighborhood. But again, that's my responsibility to see when there's big events coming up, just to keep the neighborhood safe. I will always be the biggest advocate for safety for this neighborhood, because I am given that responsibility to provide that services or that extra services to the neighborhood. So that's just a little bit, a small little portion of what I do as far as related to the funds. Yes, sir.
In the presentation we saw today, we saw that the enhancements are being budgeted as overtime. Are we talking about having 1 or 2 officers all the time that are here?
So for the detail, currently it's scheduled Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 5 to 1 in the morning, 5 p.m. to 1 in the morning, and it's 2 officers. But with that said, at my direction, I'm able to utilize those hours at whatever given hours or days that they need to be utilized. Whether it be when we were cleaning out the riverbed, when the sheriff's department was over there and the county was over there, they were there in the early mornings. I would move some of that overtime for the officers to work early mornings, just to make sure all the vagrants or those issues that are coming out of the riverbed weren't coming into the Riverpark neighborhood. So those hours are never a set hours. They will never be set hours, but that's what I have them scheduled for right now.
And in addition to the officers being funded, is any special equipment or anything like that being funded? Like you mentioned, the office and the collection, is that being funded with CFD?
So as far as specific,
I have to add to that, and I apologize. OPD, they came out to our last meeting, and they were looking to purchase some items, but wanted community input first. Unfortunately, due to some life and health issues, I did not have a chance to get a community poll going, asking how we would like to fund CFD dollars for some equipment that they agreed to stay in the community. So there is a budget for that, and they were asking for community.
Step off the side from my camera. So the OPD and special district staff, we work together to set the OPD portion of the budget. And at the last neighborhood council meeting, like Ty just mentioned, there was a presentation for, I believe, 2 or 1. One bicycle and 1 radar system for the vehicle that is used in Riverpark, and a bicycle for the essentially foot patrol to get out and for faster response time. Those items are currently included in it's under office supplies, which is the name of the account, but they're stored at the office for OPD. So those are currently included. We had some positive feedback from the last neighborhood council meeting, so we had those included preemptively as we felt the response was positive. But like we said, this budget is open to your comment. We can, we want to be responsive to the neighborhood. So if there's further discussion that you have amongst the neighborhood, that can absolutely be taken into account.
I have a few more things. You spoke about the activity logs, and I previously mentioned it. We have a CFD website. I don't know if you know about that, where we have updates on the trail, dog park closures, the landscape maintenance schedule. And I had requested that the activity logs, I know you're not keen on it, be posted. The reason being the transparency, because at one time, 30 to 40% of the calls were not in the neighborhood. It has changed, but just for transparency, I think they should be uploaded. We've addressed that in the past.
Yeah. There was a portion of the time, I believe you had requested the calls for service for the Riverpark neighborhood. And that was given to you from one of our prior assistant chiefs from our crime analysis unit. And when that information was given to the council, those calls for service included, because of the radius of the way the crime analysis.
Oh, no. What I'm getting at is I had requested 2 different types of reports for all activity only in Riverpark. And then separately, the activity log for the employee or the officers who staff that overtime rate, all the calls they received on those specific days that they were assigned to the neighborhood. Now, what I found was that 30% of the calls that officer responded to were at the collector. I'm not talking about all, because we get a mix of service. You get your standard, and then you get the enhanced, and I'm talking about only the enhanced officers. Activity log showed you responding to 34% of calls at the collector, or just outside of the neighborhood.
Right. And I'm thinking, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing. It's in reference to one activity log that you saw where the officer was.
So funding, I would have more than one, because you have more than one officer.
Correct.
Or you have an officer riding together. So I'm just referring to only that officer who is assigned to Riverpark, and you're spending 30 to 40% of his time on call at the collection on that particular day. And that this was not just once, this was like several, I guess, but I had spoken to Commander McArthur and got that settled. So that, that's been resolved, but my point is going forward, I would like to see the activity log posted.
And the concern was about the activity log that I have the officers submit to me at the end of their shifts for me to be aware. That's just something that's not required by this, is it CFD? Correct. So it's nothing that's required. It is required when we do get grants from the state, as far as like DUI enforcement, other type of enforcement. And that's something that's just something that I asked for that is not required, but with transparency, I totally agree with that. We could go through whatever system it is that we could try to get those to you.
Well, I mean, it's just like a handwritten sheet that they fill out, you can always block out the name.
Correct. And it's not that, it has absolutely nothing to do with the police department not wanting to be transparent. There's just a lot of the information on there, which I provided before, is blacked out because it does have neighbors' names, date of birth, the type of calls that we're responding to.
Oh, no,
And again, right, and so there wasn't any hesitation on wanting to provide that. It's just, we do have to be respectful of those confidential matters and that information. And it's something that I'm just asking the officers to do. They're not required. At any time throughout any part of the city, anybody could go down to the police department and file a Public Records Act and get those calls for service. So, I don't, we don't do that part, but we actually ask for the activity log, but that's just something that I'm requesting. That's something that you may have to speak to my command staff.
Just to be fair, anytime I post anything, something like activity log, I do block out a big portion of the address, because yes, even though you're entitled to that information, I still don't want to share my neighbors.
And I will never do that as well. So.
There's a follow-up question for our officers. Does the CFD pay for officers at special events at the collection?
So at the collection specifically, no. Again, part of that for the overtime, it's just for the neighborhood. Now, there are times, I think the last event we had was one of the concerts at the park, where it was going to be a lot, or it was for the July booth, where there was a concert there, and it was right after COVID, or COVID was starting to ease up a little bit, the restrictions. So they expected a large presence, which there was. At that time, I believe I requested 1 2-man patrol car to patrol the neighborhood because of anything that comes from that collection. From the collection event, to be in the neighborhood to monitor traffic, whether it be traffic collisions, parking issues, disputes, drivers leaving the property into the neighborhood. So that was the only time where we would utilize the overtime for the neighborhood where the collection may have a large event. Yes, I'll get back to you real quick. Yes.
What about there's a lot of events on Mondays, like after school hours, like there's softball, there's kickball, there's soccer going on. Is there any like patrol cars going around to make sure cars are slowing down for safety hazards?
So,
because I personally go out there and play kickball, and I have never seen any patrol cars go around or put any signs up
for that portion.
kids to-
So for the overtime, again, I just have those right now at Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but minus Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the overtime given to the neighborhood, as every citizen is entitled to, is police services. So again, Riverpark does fall within a beat within the police department, how we have them separated. So at any, there's always going to be a police car readily available. Just that enhanced overtime services is for the officers just to be in that neighborhood during that portion. But as far as those specific concerns, that's something where you could address me, and that's something where I have to investigate and see where I can move my officers.
Could we even put like a sign out there? I've seen many times where we put signs that says slow down and stuff like that, especially since there's kids out there playing and it's like sports season.
Right.
And I feel like that's like a very top priority, safety.
I agree. And I will always be the biggest advocate for that. But that's something where if it's a concern to you, it will be a concern for me, and that's something that I have to direct my officers to. Yes, sir.
That's my understanding. I heard something recently about the bikes that
Yes.
proposed, and that's great. I heard that previously the CFD did fund a vehicle for your special officer, correct?
I wouldn't be able to answer that.
I do not know if it was the previous fiscal year, or it may have been the year prior. There was a patrol vehicle that was funded through the CFD, but yes,
That was intended for this neighborhood, right? Not just in general city use.
that is from my understanding. It was intended for the officer to be used in this neighborhood, correct? But
I believe it was 2019.
19,
I believe so. It's in a 600-page document that I have uploaded on my community website. That was obtained through a PRA, going back to 5 years of expenses.
Excuse me. The follow-up question, I think it's for either our police or special district staff. Can you explain why we pay for overtime and not straight time for the enhanced services?
So I don't know if I have the perfect answer for that. The only thing is we just need to understand, as a police department and my position as a police officer, I still got to do my regular full-time duties as, for my position as a corporal, as being part of the neighborhood policing team. The reason that it's on overtime is because that's just an additional enhanced service that goes for your neighborhood. Throughout the week, my work week, I do spend my time in Riverpark and in the other neighborhoods that I'm responsible for. But I'm just guessing the best answer is we still have to do our regular 40 hours or 80 hours of pay period. And then for those services are on an overtime basis.
Okay,
Yes.
so I can piggyback on that. So what I'm previously told for the overtime rate is because an officer has to fulfill 40 hours of standard service. So that means if they have the time and they want to, they can sign up for overtime as a bet, not necessarily to Riverpark, but they're making themselves available. And because they can make themselves available, that's how we end up paying the overtime.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I do have a question. Is it also the cops and the police officers who are going around here also being trained for people with disabilities?
No,
Or
it's
just-
folks who are trained to handle folks with autism who are going through.
Any kind?
Right, and throughout the year, we do have updated training, we have mandatory training that's required by the state. We do have a lot of services that come from the county and the state level that do come to speak to our officers. A large amount of our officers are certified in our crisis intervention team. It's a program that the county puts on that trains officers for any type of awareness, medication, information, just something for us to be able to be more resourceful for them. So yes, that is a constant training.
And I'd just like to say, as a parent of autistic children, that I commend the department for doing that.
Thank you, sir.
You do an excellent job of that.
Thank you, sir.
The original cop that was, forgot his name, what was it Brandon?
I'll serve on that.
Yeah,
Yes.
he was here. I do have a question for you. Just want to start the exact same question.
Sure.
Do you guys still do donuts? Or
I
is it
prefer a
bagels and
bagel
energy
than
drinks? My sister asked that, I had to ask.
Wow. There's a quick two-part question here. So Riverpark residents are paying a premium for safety, namely police this fiscal year. What do they get, they being Riverpark residents, what do they get exactly that is over and above the service provided to Oxnard residents, those with and without assessment distance?
So maybe the benefit would be the faster response time, the visibility, the information going to your district coordinator, which is me, the problem solving aspect of that, which allows me again to direct the officers to go at specific times, or for me to be aware of crime trends, and something for that I think is absolutely priceless.
And then the follow-up to that, first, was the tree lighting billed to CFD 5? Or excuse me, was the tree lighting billed to CFD 5 for officer overtime?
it's about regarding officer overtime. I don't.
Yeah, the answer is no.
That was a question, but it was phrased as a statement, so I'll read it as it is on here. The tree lighting event at the collection was billed to CFD 5 for officer overtime. This was a general benefit event. Is it appropriate that Riverpark residents put the bill for events that are of a general benefit versus special benefit solely to Riverpark residents?
Oh, what was, okay, I have a.
Yeah.
Commander MacArthur is here also, but also just building on what you said before, if there's officers that are on duty in regards to an event in the collection and they're patrolling for my understanding, events that are trickling out into the Riverpark neighborhood, that would be a potential expense, but I'll explain that.
And thank you everyone for these questions. They're very valid. You know, it's very difficult, right, to separate the services that go to the collection also for Riverpark. And there's a natural overflow, things that happen in the collection naturally, you know, overflow to Riverpark. And we try to have that distinction, but sometimes very difficult. A lot of these events, like the question that was asked with the tree lighting, the summer concerts, things like that, we appropriately staff those events working with the collection. That's not to say that sometimes you get the overflow into Riverpark, and though, so we got the Riverpark card working in collaboration with the collection. You know, just to get ahead of it, there's been some talks with the collection management for them to absorb some of these costs, because they also want police presence here at the collection. And so we told them very specifically that the patrol, the enhanced police services provided by Riverpark are strictly for Riverpark. And so that's what we're doing. But sometimes I think there is that confusion that when we have these special events, you see police officers working with the traffic, cadets, other units providing services to the collection. And then there's that feeling that Riverpark residents are paying for those services, and they're not. That's being billed directly, whether it be general fund or we're just simply flexing officers, the neighborhood policing officers to work those events. But at the same time, we do have the Riverpark cars, you know, working outside of our. I'm sorry, Tom, yes.
Yeah, I just have a question.
Yeah,
And I kept
absolutely.
asked in regards to
Sure.
tree lighting ceremony. So when that officer or the two
Yeah.
were staffed during that night, did it, I mean, I think it's reasonable to ask about the collection, even though they are
Yeah.
staffed in the neighborhood, pay for that, because it's not a huge amount, but it's the
Yeah.
purpose of it. I
Right.
mean, if they have the funds to put on a huge
Yeah.
show, why not just pick up the additional officer or two? Because we don't invite people into the neighborhood, they did.
That's a very fair question. That's something that we've brought up to them. And I know the city manager has also talked about that before, because the collection forms part of Riverpark. So to think that they're separate from Riverpark, they're not separate, they're inclusive of Riverpark.
Yeah.
But the way it was established, it creates that confusion. But yeah, we are having those talks with them now about them actually absorbing some of these costs for enhanced services that directly are for the benefit of the collection, right? We all enjoy those services. So we are having those discussions with them. Yeah.
We have one more statement regarding police, and then there's a question that is outside of the police enhanced services. So the last one for police is, it says not a question, but Riverpark has some amazing CIT trained officers. So
That's a
Chris,
great
I wanted
point.
to share
Yeah,
that.
and that's, I think, pointed to your comments, sir, about, yeah, we do take pride in that, right, in having officers trained with CIT, yeah, to be able to deal with folks that are autistic or have another mental crises, to be able to deal with them appropriately.
Before we switch off to this topic, this is such a small percentage of our budget.
Very small, yeah.
Is the last thing that I, as a resident, but I even have to double it. Even if it means they're helping us from overflow from the collection, like we all benefit from the events. I can't tell you the concerts I've walked over to, tree legends I've walked over to, family display. And I get that it comes with crowds and people and riffraff. Double the police budget and cut expenses somewhere else. Like, I don't.
And I appreciate that. And, you
Just
know,
say yes.
Yes, I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it. And I appreciate that. I know that,
That's all you need.
yeah, not to belabor the question, but earlier we were asked about overtime costs. Overtime costs is actually cheaper than paying for regular officers because of the benefits and everything else that's added to it. And sometimes, we have difficulty because of our staffing levels, sometimes filling the overtime spot. So that's something we struggle with internally ourselves to try to get officers to come out and work. We have officers that regularly do work here, but it's sometimes difficult to staff.
Create and fund our own police department for only Riverpark, if it makes sense, that we're paying overtime rates for you guys to come do extra stuff for us. And so for you guys to leave your families for an extra 10 hours a week, and you've
Yes.
already been gone 40, 50, 60, I appreciate you, and I hope that.
Thank you.
that
We're
line-
increasing this another 20.
I think we can transition to Anthony, but one last question about that. Do we have any kind of just ballpark about what it is per resident or per household that pays in the CFD for the enhanced services?
We can do some, we can do some quick math, but I couldn't tell you off the top
I
of my
can
head.
tell you, it's approximately 150. Now that's only for the overtime service. That doesn't include the $400,000 budget, which is another, I think it was budgeted at 250. So average about
150.
150.
Per
Now
house per
separately,
year.
you have like your office supplies and equipment, another 150. So you want to add about 50 on that, 200.
Just for those who didn't hear that, it's about 150
Well,
a
that-
household,
now
which would be a
keep in mind
property.
the different tiers, because the affordable house is paid a fraction, but it's just to say like the homeowner of the bigger house.
So if I'm spending 200 a year to have extra police, 3 nights a week.
Yeah.
That's steep.
Specifically for those who are online, it depends on essentially the classification for your property. It depends on how much you pay for your property taxes, how proportionally that goes to police services.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just real quick. I work the north of Oxnard on the weekends. and Without the enhanced enforcement, people have called a call at night, or 9 at night until 3 in the city. So these enhanced services, as a resident, I appreciate having these enhanced services. Otherwise, the city so busy. That's 14 and 12 with all the north end spots. And it's basically 6 p.m. when I start until 4 a.m. when I'm almost done doing reports. I'm called the call part of the team. At least in the weekends.
I'll just summarize that real quick. We do have a officer in the house. And specifically saying that currently he is so busy on the north end beats that the enhanced services provide dedicated services to this area in excess, well in excess of what they would normally be able to provide if it wasn't there. All right, so there is one question online.
Yeah, there's one last question on Zoom. What is the cap on the CFD levy?
Okay, so I wanted to bring us back to the slide here real quick, specifically for that question. This here is your cap. It's the maximum fiscal year 22-23 special tax. That is the number. That essentially has been calculated over the number of years that the CFD has been in force. That the original amount has gone up by a certain percentage every year, and that is what the current amount currently is what it sits at. That's the total maximum assessed amount. Within that, there are, I believe, 13 property classifications. So each property would pay a certain proportion of that maximum tax if it was assessed in accordance to their square footage and classification, excuse me. And then there's a follow-up to that, correct?
The follow-up is a statement. My understanding that the cost inflator is 2 to 5% of that cap, not the current levy amount. As an example, the increase was roughly 15% increase, which caught some residents by surprise. I believe they're referring to the current fiscal year leading into it. As that was much more than 2% of the current levy. Fire was taken out, so the final levy was less that amount, plus $400,000 in admin costs less also. Sorry, that's odd sentence structure, my apologies. So knowing the cap or limit for the annual levy would be important to know, then a rough estimate of how high the increase could go for the next year.
To repeat that for those who didn't hear it, the question is that there's an annual cost inflator built in to this maximum, and it's between 2% and 5% dependent upon the certain basket of goods that it's tied to. Essentially, that can be changed year over year between that amount. However, that percentage increase on the maximum tax doesn't necessarily correspond to the actual levy. And that is why you see here that we are proposing that we levy approximately 50% of the maximum special tax for this fiscal year's budget. In this particular case, for example, if there was a large project that was added to the fiscal year's expenditure, yes, this budget would increase. And if it was not offset by a levy credit or some other fund balance contribution, this assessed special tax can fluctuate. Yes, and that fluctuation is not restricted by the 2 to 5%. So in bare bones terms, that's essentially what he's saying there, that this amount, yes, it can fluctuate. Now, the last portion of that, what we could potentially see increase year over year, dependent upon certain conditions, I believe.
So knowing the cap or limit for the annual levy would be important to know, then a rough estimate of how high the increase could go for the next year.
So for a rough estimate, it really depends on the budget. It depends on what the budget is set at and what the community would like to do year over year. Those questions that can't be answered tonight.
I have a suggestion because in the formation document, what they talked about the max cap. Now that when people, it's available online, CFD website, this goes back to 2005, wouldn't reflect the current max cap. I think that should be separately uploaded because when I go out meeting with people about the petition, I took this with me so they have a visual of what they're seeing with the max cap and how we almost got hit by a 15% increase, and it kind of explains where we're at currently. So you're not looking at what could have potential double.
So to elaborate on what Titus said here, for those at home, if you couldn't hear, basically there's documentation on the city's website that explains which property classification your property may fall into and what your property classification's max cap tax rate can be. There are documents that say the original amount, and there are also documents that say the current assessed value.
It's the
So-
current that's not currently uploaded, just the original.
That is the annual report you're referring to, and I believe we just got that. Yeah, so that should be up there soon. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes.
But just to make sure, just to clarify here, meaning tomorrow, say when the next budget comes up, we can't just, it's not just like somebody in the city is going to say, okay, well, we can charge 6 million, we're going to charge 6 million, and you know what, and that's it, right?
To be completely frank, I don't believe any staff member for the city would recommend that the budget be increased $6 million. Absolutely not. But to follow up to your question, this is the maximum. However, we want this budget to be directed by the community's needs, not necessarily what staff says is absolutely necessary. So to answer your question, for future budget years, we would like to see the input, especially particularly on these numbers, be driven from community involvement.
And that's basically what's happening with the numbers now, as far as these increases we've talked about in the past, is being driven by community requests and community needs, not just an arbitrary number saying we're going to take that up.
Essentially, yes. And basically we're standing here tonight because there's been involvement over the last 2 fiscal years that has directed this.
All right, so it sounds like, or it appears like the questions are done for now. Year to year, we will, I think staff will endeavor to hold this town hall meeting a little bit earlier than the end of May. So a couple of comments I want to make in closing. So obviously you all live here and have invested here, so you probably don't hear the complaints that we usually hear at City Hall from most of the rest of the city, which is, why are you giving special privileges to Riverpark? Right? Because people don't understand the mellow roots and the CFD. So it's completely flipped for the remainder of the city. I want to just remind folks, and I'm sure you noticed it on the most recent tax bill. So actually last year, your Councilmember Tron asked me to review the details of the expenditures for the CFD. And so if you look at, and by the way, I do have documents here explaining Melrose and what it allows when the developer creates a community, a planned community, what kinds of expenses are allowed. So I looked at it and I recognized that this particular CFD was paying for fire services as well as a fire department. So we made the decision last year to remove the fire services component of your expenses. We can't remove the fire department, the actual station, because that's bonded. So that's been removed, and then shortly thereafter, Councilmember Tron was able to get his colleagues on the city council to agree to pass a resolution stating that staff can't reimpose that expenditure going forward. So I don't know I can't remember the amount of the decrease. Anyone remember?
1.6 million.
1.6 million was the decrease. So that's out, that's gone. I don't see any scenario where that can ever come back. So just wanted to remind you of that. And then again, everybody else complains about how nice you have it here as an upscale neighborhood because people don't understand what Melrose is and what a CFD is. So just to remind everyone of that. All right, so I think we're done. Thank you for showing up, and we can talk afterwards. Thanks for showing
I would
up.
like to ride on.
Can I finish? Okay, so thanks for taking the time. Again, we'll endeavor to do this hopefully in early April next year. Does that work? Okay, and these documents will be available online as well. And we're also, it's going to take a while, but we're actually going to improve the city's website. It's a very, very bad website, and we'll improve it and make it more functional and easier for everyone to find information. Okay, so thanks again, everyone, for coming out.